Well, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to the UK Brand Show. Hello, Penny.
Hello, Mark. How are you?
Very good, thank you. Are you?
Yeah, very good, thank you.
Good. You're in Kent today?
I am, yes, and it's definitely autumn down here today.
Yes. Well, I'm up in North Yorkshire in Harrogate, and it's raining like mad up here today. So it's been a bit of a shock after what it was like last weekend. But that's the British weather for you, hey?
That's why we talk about it so much.
Indeed, it is. Well, listen, we've got a great guest coming on the show today. Um, his name is Professor Tony Hines. And let me tell you a little bit about him before he joins us. He's the CEO of a company called Consuming Future, and it's a leading consultancy which supports and promotes ethical, sustainable creativity. And previously, he was Professor of Marketing at Manchester University, where he advised and contributed to the UK Parliamentary Upper House Communications Committee, the House of Lords, and their inquiry into the advertising industry. So, as a result of his work, a subsequent parliamentary report was published entitled Advertising in a Digital Age. So, this guy advised Parliament on the future of advertising. So he's got a lot to say and a very respected guy. Previously, he was Director of Fashion Market Research Director at the University of Art in London. So he's got a really good pedigree. And as I say, I've known him for many, many years. Really
Very,
top.
very.
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to him. So he's going to join us in about 5 or 10 minutes. So just before he does, and I think it's probably even a good scene setter for today. Actually, I thought I'd mention some or a piece I wrote for my news association INMAR about advertising, of course, and it was about the top three new, what I see as new revenue and engagement sales opportunities. So I just thought it might be interested to the audience here, and it might dovetail into what Tony's going to talk about. So there are a number of new, if you've got people who are out selling advertising on your behalf, there's a number of ways to sell to advertisers in this year and beyond. And arguably, the most significant ones to come on stream in recent times, I think there are three of them, and they've dominated my sort of thinking recently, and be interested if they've dominated yours as well. So first one, no particular order, is commerce media. So that's a sort of fairly new type of advertising that allows brands to reach consumers at the point of purchase. So it's done by placing ads on e-commerce platforms, Amazon being one example, and other websites where there's a sort of copycat process, I guess, and setups which now give what I believe is sort of a fresh approach to consumers who are already shopping. So commerce media it definitely is a rapidly growing market, and it gives us, I think, a significant opportunity for salespeople to be owned, to be owned or earned. So owned or earned media, as in owned or recommended, if you like, by media, but appearing as earned by the advertisers as the content created about them. And like reviews and social posts, and now e-commerce by the media itself. So it's a new way. Media companies, for example, are grabbing it, and it's a great way, I think, where not just media, anyone can get involved. So it's basically selling stuff off your website, putting people at the point of purchase. They already trust you, hopefully, if they come to your website. So hopefully they'll come and buy stuff from you as well because they trust your reviews or what you recommend to them, etc., etc. That's how Amazon live, isn't it? They advise you, you bought this, you might like this.
It's the new point of sale, isn't it? So as you're exiting the supermarket, they'll position products. It's the same thing, but
exactly the same. Yeah. So that's the first one. And I think that's something which is worth delving into. And we don't have time today to go too much into it. But the second one is influencer advertising. I think you've got some experience with all of this. So for those who don't know, it's a sort of type of marketing that involves working with social media influencers to promote advertiser products or services. And it can be a really effective way to reach either a new audience or a very specific target of consumers, because they come these influencers, they come with a built-in audience of followers who trust what they say.
Definitely.
So it's like a messiah complex, if you will, isn't it? Really, that it's salespeople should be able to help advertisers identify and partner with the right influencers as part of their campaigns where it's deemed appropriate. And I think in my opinion, the most significant current one after this is audio, and this is I'm thinking of podcasting here. This is area number 3. I think there's a huge opportunity around this for all sorts of different businesses, big and small. And I think, from an advertising perspective, they're a great platform for advertisers and sponsors for all many reasons. And in this article I wrote for him, I put just a few of them. So podcasts can be a very targeted medium. There's podcasts on every imaginable subject out there, isn't there? On fashion, on food, on...
Absolutely. So positioning around those communities of interest is
Exactly.
very powerful. And with a background in radio, I obviously am very pro podcasts.
I'm sure you would be, yeah. Secondly, podcast listeners are highly engaged, so they're typically paying close attention to the content because they've chosen to listen to it, which means they're more likely to notice and remember the ads. The podcasts they offer sort of a very personal, intimate listening experience, I'd say.
Yeah.
It makes them a great platform for advertisers to build a relationship with potential customers. They're loyal. People who listen to podcasts, they tend to be be loyal to the shows that they like, and it means they're more likely to hear an ad or a sponsorship tagline many times, which of course can help brand awareness and ad recall. And they're generally more affluent. So there's a lot of studies in the States which show that podcast listeners tend to be more affluent than the general population. And there's a whole bunch of studies, the Edison Research Institute, I think they're called, found that 45% of podcast listeners in the States have a household income of over $255,000. And there's lots of stuff. There's a study by Chartbeat, if you know them, and they found that podcast listeners are more likely to be interested in luxury brands and spend more money on discretionary items more so than the general public. So there's a bit about that as well. And then podcast advertising can be very cost effective. You get big or small company again. The cost of advertising on a podcast can be very affordable. Especially compared to other forms of advertising, such as radio and TV, in comparison, and print. So,
and because audio, people can listen to podcasts while they're doing something else. Often they can be doing something related to the advertiser that's trying to sell you something. So,
it's right.
In that way,
it's right. So I think that there's the load. Oh, and also it's measurable, so you can track the effectiveness of your podcast. And through the platforms that, we know that things you can find click-through rates, you can get conversion rates, you can find out geographical listener data, brand awareness, and all that sort of stuff is really good to report back to advertisers to make them loyal to you and come back and spend money with you. So there's a ton of stuff. And I think, it's a really effective way to reach, as I say, a target audience and build brand awareness and drive sales from advertisers. And ideally, of course, if they are our own podcast, which we've developed as part of the whole mix of things that we do. So there's a ton of stuff out there, I think, which I think whether it's podcast, whether it's influencer, or whether it's just commerce, radio, e-commerce, selling stuff off site, as I said, there are new ways of engaging and new ways of generating revenue for everyone, small, medium enterprises or big companies. All that applies to everyone. So, but have you got influencer advertising experience?
Well, only that I've engaged for other customers before with influencers to indeed influence their followers. I wouldn't say it's advertising as such, and I think it's an ever-changing environment as the flow of consumers across different platforms. Influencers can last for a certain amount of time and then can wane.
I think that's a good point.
Of the moment, really.
Of the moment, indeed, yeah. Well, we've got Professor Hines about to join us, so let's bring him in and let's have a chat with him. Tony.
Mark, hello.
You're
How are
there.
you?
Hello, my friend. How are you?
I'm very good, yes.
Good. Penny, meet Tony.
Hello, good to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you, Penny.
It's
Good.
great to have you on the show, Tony. I say it's been. I was just telling Penn, we've known each other for many years, but not seen each other for many years as well. So it's really great to see your face.
Yeah, it's still same face.
Well, it's really great to see you.
Yeah.
And I've explained your background, and you're doing some wonderful stuff. And I would like to get into maybe just give us a little background about Consuming Future at the moment. I talked about the advertising report you did for the parliamentary committee.
Yeah.
And we'll get to that with your presentation in a second. But tell us a little about Consuming Future.
What does Consuming Future do? Well, I sometimes ask myself that every day. But we do all sorts of things. It's basically a consultancy. It's fairly broad. It's focused on ethical, sustainable creativity. That's the unique proposition that we have. And we try to work with organizations in a variety of ways, both providing market research and, of course, providing marketing services and strategic services to those organizations. And so we work in different ways with public sector organizations and private companies, private businesses.
Right, gotcha.
And small and large companies too. It's not just one size fits all, and it can be anywhere. The sort of work we do, we prepare reports, we talk to people, we work with whatever they want to do, and we work with a host of partners who we will pull in to provide additional services should they need them. And if we can't do the job, we'll tell them we can't do the job, and we'll just get somebody else in to do it, because we want to maintain our brand reputation in the whole process.
And I can see behind you there a lot of the stuff which sums up your company, I guess, does it? The work that you do. Yeah,
there's a lot of things on that board that are meaningful in that sense. And with the sort of research that we do, it's both quantitative and qualitative research to get a full picture, to generate insights, and to actually get practical things that people can improve the processes and the way they do business. And that's it, really, in a nutshell. Okay, so in advertising, there are always challenges. And the key things for me, these are the always challenges. These are the invariant things. These are the things that everybody has to do. You've got to reach the right audience. You have to measure the impact if you can, where you can, and you need to stay ahead of the competition. So that's a pretty important process for people to think about. And you can do that. We've had to think about that offline before we were online. So the one thing that online digital gives you is the measurement of impact, which is fairly straightforward from the metrics you can get from digital marketing and so on. So let's just think through the next one. Oh yeah, the demographics. I'm not going to spend too much time on that, but when we kind of segment markets, we have to think about how we're going to do it. And we often do it through demographics in this sort of way, looking at the different age bands and age groupings. And we try to find out what people's preferences and interests are. And so there might be geodemographics, because we want to know where they live, or there might be psychographics, because we want to understand what they're thinking and what their interests are. And we want to match that with their experience, and we want to understand their experience so we can actually market to them in a particular way, so that we can actually target particular segments of consumers. And it might just be a niche that we want to reach, a particular niche, and it might just be part of an age group, part of an age band, and we really want to focus in. It's like laser-like focus, I think, isn't it, really, that we want to get down to drill down through the mess of data that might be there.
Yeah.
But you can see here we've got sort of populations in full, and then I've kind of overlaid it. I've just had a look, because one of my tips for the smaller and medium-sized business is to use lots of the existing stuff that's out there that they can hook into and connect with, that won't cost them too much money. And if we think about Facebook, many people use Facebook for all sorts of reasons, And their kind of profiling looks something like that. So they've got similar sorts of age groups and age bands, and those are the sort of general audience that they have. So sometimes that will fit our profile quite well. And if I overlay that slide just on the next one, which is the previous one, you can see that it matches up quite well in terms of, you know, the different generations that we're trying to reach. But Facebook in particular has obviously a big audience in Gen Z, Gen Y, Gen X. And you mustn't misinterpret this slide, because at the one end, you've got the younger age group of 13 to 17. I suppose it's the alpha, what we call the alpha now. And at the top end, you've got the over 65s. And so you might still want to get to those markets. And Facebook is still a particularly good way that you could actually use to reach those markets. But if you wanted to reach a particularly younger market with your segmentation process, then you might think about Instagram and on the Meta profile, or you might think about TikTok or another social media organization that you can plug into and use. But always, that's why I go back to the original thing. You've got to know who the target audience is to begin with. So it's trying to pin down and identify who your target audience is, and then deciding on what message you want to give to that audience, so that you can communicate, engage, and enhance through experience. So I think it's those sorts of things that we're trying to do, really. Now, some of the contemporary challenges, obviously, in the marketplace are the things I've got on screen here. And you'll be very aware of this, and I'm sure people listening will be very aware of this too. It's things like sustainability, and we spend a lot of time in Consuming Future considering the sustainability aspect of everything we do. And we think about what we do personally in the organization, but also about what our target audience and what our customers and what the businesses that we work with want from us when it comes to sustainability. And it's all very well, you know, we don't want greenwashing, we want real things to happen. So it's very important that we understand how we can make real things happen in the sustainability space. And then, of course, we've got the diversity and inclusion. That's also extremely important, isn't it? Because we recognize that there's a lot of wasted talent on the marketing side, on the advertising side, and therefore we do want to encourage more participation from what you would call, I suppose, non-normal audiences, both for the work that's on the output side, but also from the production side. We want people to engage from all kinds of backgrounds, because they've all got different things to offer, and they know different things about different spaces, and they experience their lives differently. And we want to be inclusive, and we want to encourage diversity. And diversity, you know, we've always said that what makes the world go round is that everybody's different. I think different approaches, different places, different spaces, that's what we want to be. And then I've got this, you can see the first party data on the screen. And that's just recognizing that it's very important to own this first party data, because it's an asset that we can build capital from, and especially with Google and obviously other companies not having access to the third-party cookie data. So I think that's pretty important to focus down on that first-party data. So it's about having strategies to collect that data. And I think as a small business, we often overlook the importance of email contact. And we go for all the flash things that we try to do, but email lists are still pretty important. We can still market lots of what we do and get to people through emails if we can get good data. So we need strategies to draw them across our websites, our touch points, our contact points, and we have to generate from that contact good quality first party data, so we can go back and actually speak to them in different ways. And we have to have you know, a careful way to do that. I'm just going to move this screen around here because I can't see my next thing. Yeah. So we've got branded content. That's another thing that's pretty important. And we all know what branded content is. This is the sort of content that appears in news media, and it's alongside other stories and so on that might be there. So branded content in that way is pretty important, and that can be important for some kinds of approaches and the way we do stuff. And I know we've talked, Mark, off air about branding studios and stuff, and lots of what we would call in news media traditional businesses have decided that it's cheaper for them these days to actually bring a lot of that stuff in-house and try and produce in-house materials and in-house messages, in-house content. So I think that's another important consideration. And I think that's not so much for the small and medium-sized business to be thinking about, but that's for the big traditional type businesses to be thinking about different ways that they can approach their own strategies, but using partnerships and collaborations with all kinds of different providers. So I think we now live in a world that's very different than the world, we might have started in our marketing careers. It's changed an awful lot. And if you think about the turn of the century, I can remember going to the United States back in 2000, and I went on what was called a trade mission for a .com tour, and I went to various places. I went out to California, and I went to a whole host of different companies, and I ended up back in New York at a company called fashionmal.com that was just starting off. And that was a very big investment exercise. They were getting lots of money from the investor community to set up this business, but they had no income. They weren't generating any income, but they all seemed to be having a very good time. And that went on for a couple of years until kind of things caught up with them. But I think the way in which we think about the marketing in the 2000s, it was all a new frontier, and now it seems to be settling down a bit. The dust is kind of settling, but it's even, as I say, the dust is settling. There's no stability anymore because there are new things coming along all the time. And there's always a new kid on the block that disrupts things in terms of, tech businesses and the way that the market actually works. So, I mean, we can think about all those things. I mean, Elon Musk is probably trying to do that right now with X. Nobody quite knows what X is, but X is going to be a big competitor, I would suggest, for Meta at some stage if they can generate the leverage from the resources that they have without losing too much of the goodwill on the way. I think that's the careful balance that they've got to do. So these new technologies, as we move into new technologies, they present all kinds of different opportunities for us too. And I think, when we think of the way in which we engage with people through new technology, I mean, everybody in COVID got online. I mean, the whole world seemed to get online overnight. So there's a different way you can reach a community or people throughout the globe now. It's not local. It's not global. It really is global in every sense of the word. You can actually get to people in different countries and different places with different messages at different times. So I think the new technologies opened that up, but there's so many new technologies coming on, from artificial intelligence, all the things you can do with AI. AI can sort out it can sort out your plans, it can bid at auctions in programmatic advertising spaces, and it can do it instantly in nanoseconds. It can just do so many things very fast. And I think all these new technologies are changing the way in which consumers will engage with the advertising industry and the advertising space in future. And they are beginning to do that right now. And you think about headsets and so on. Then you think about haptics, which is the touch points, the experience through the headset and stuff. You can touch things and get the sensation that you're actually touching physical things. So lots of things changing the way we work. And then I've put down the consultative selling. Of course, that's an interesting process in itself, because you can work with all kinds of different people in different spaces to generate what you want to achieve through this kind of consultative selling process. And I think that's an important aspect. And then I've got brand safety as, I've gone the wrong way around this. I just realized I'm going from new technologies, consultative selling, to brand safety. But brand safety is important because it's really about reputation and reputation building. And it's about maintaining the integrity of your own brand while you partner with other brands. And so you've got to make sure you're in the right space and the right place with these other brands so that you can maintain integrity. And I think those sort of 7 boxes for me present, I've mentioned the always challenges, which is about get the target audience, get the measurement, and try and understand what's going on to get the connections. And I think this space here tells us about the contemporary challenges. So these are the things that are happening now that we have to take account of and somehow match our interests with as advertisers, so that we can think about how to communicate with the different markets. Now, not all these things will necessarily apply to everybody every time, but some of these things will become more important, and you have to rank them and prioritize them. And that's a careful process. If I just look at some of the trends that are also shaping the future, this is the number of people on social media, 4.8 billion. I mean, it's astounding, really. There's 4.8 billion people in the world. And in some places, I mean, you know, they haven't got electric in the globe, but there are 4.8 billion. So that's 60% of the world population on social media. And those figures are from April 2023. So of those, 3.6 billion are on the Meta platforms. And that's about 2.6 billion on Facebook and 1 billion on Instagram. So you can see that social media presents some big opportunities, but also it's a very congested space. And so how do you get your message into that space with the target audience that you want without losing it in the process of the message? You really got to get a clear message across. And there are various strategies we could use to do that. We could use, if you're a small business, I mean, guerrilla marketing is still quite a popular thing to do, isn't it? Because you can have something that's very unusual and a video could go viral, and you can get to the community that you wish to reach. If you're trying to hit a particular group of people, then there are various ways in which you would do so using this guerrilla marketing technique. And it's about doing something crazy, maybe something unusual. It might be painting on a wall. It might be, you know, if you could get Banksy around to paint on a wall, and you could you could get him to put the message that you wanted to put out there, and you could just video it and send it on TikTok. I'm sure you'd have, you know, millions of people watching this out of that 4.8 billion audience. So I think it's about generating ideas to do something unusual and something different. And then there's, you know, people run events and non-traditional organizations, people that never run events. I mean, some of the interesting things I think that newspapers have engaged in over the past few years are these sort of what I would call intellectual tours, where they have, you know, people who are leaders in the field, maybe a historian, an archaeologist, taking people on tour. You know, I mean, those are classic, and you can set that alongside stories that newspapers can actually publish as well. So there are different ways in which to engage your audience and to immerse them in the messages that you want to get out there. So I see it all as a communication process in that sense. Then I come to my one of my main interests, and it's one of the reasons that I got involved with Consuming Future in the first place, because I was very aware of the fact that sustainability was such an important topic for everybody. And obviously, I was interested in this notion of the ethical consumer. And I think there are lots of consumers out there that want to do the right thing, but don't quite know how to do the right thing. And they need a little nudge and a little help in that process. And I think there are organizations who also want to do the right thing, but they've done it in clunky ways over time. I mean, if you're a fashion business or something, for example, and you wanted to have what they call slow fashion as opposed to fast fashion, that kind of thing, then they've gone around in a circle talking about it, but not being clear enough in the messaging that they're getting across to people, saying, you know, if you want to be a real sort of grounded, ethical consumer, what you need to do is make sure your clothes aren't made in a sweatshop out in the Far East somewhere. And you really want to make sure that you're working with people who are following sustainable policies, that, you know, everything can be tracked. And I think we're getting to a world where everything in supply chains is going to be tracked from A to Z. And I think as that progresses, then there's going to be no hiding place for brands that actually aren't sustainable and ethical in that process. And so therefore, they've really got to get to a position of understanding this and engaging with it, perhaps a little more carefully than they have done or are doing presently in some cases. Although there are some companies out there that are doing a good job, I think, in actually doing work on sustainability and, of course, understanding ethical consumption. So in a survey that was done, 81% of consumers said that they feel very strongly that companies should help improve the environment. Now, you could ask people on the street, and everyone thinks it's a good thing. Yeah, you know, we want climate change to not be something that we contribute to. We'd like to be ethical. But then when it comes down to the difference between saying that and the difference between acting, so, you know, how do you get around? Well, I use my fossil fuel car to drive around in. Is that sustainable? Is that ethical? Well, probably not. Can I switch to an electric vehicle? Well, maybe, but they're very expensive. And lots of consumers can't switch and can't necessarily afford the premium to do the sustainable and ethical thing. You know, and when we're talking about living in times of, we all know that prices are increasing through inflation. We all know that the cost of living is expensive for people, particularly in the UK at present, but elsewhere too. I mean, we haven't got the level of inflation that they've got in South American countries, but, you know, we've got 7.2%, I think, at the moment. I think that's the latest inflation figure. It's probably today's figure. And the Bank of England still has a target of 2%, but where are we going with the idea of making connections with people in different audiences that perhaps live in different income groups through our approach to sustainability and ethical consumption? Because sometimes we aim our talk about sustainability and ethical consumption at people who are middle class, middle income, or on the high end of income, and we need to aim it at other people too. So there are ways to get to different audiences and to get them to be part of this change process. If you talk to millennials, 73% of Gen Z said they're willing to pay extra for sustainable products. Now, again, that comes down to saying something, but acting on it might be something different. If you see a bargain in a store when you walk in and it hits you between the eyes and it's made of polyester and it looks good and I can wear it for the weekend sort of thing, then would you want to reject that? And would you want to pay the 70, would you want to pay extra? Well, 73% of millennials say yes. So I think what I'm saying here is that different age groups will see this sustainability and ethical consumption issue differently. And I think also not just the age groups will see it differently, but so too will I'm guessing, different income groups. And when I say I'm guessing with data. I mean, there's some data around that suggests they do those things differently. And 79% of consumers consider a company's social and environmental commitment before they make a purchase. So I think those things have happened quite fast. You know, perhaps 10 years ago, did people worry too much about sustainability and ethical consumption? Well, a few people did, but now it's, you know, it's obviously a stronger proposition. And then I think there's also a trend towards personalization and customization. 91% of consumers more likely to shop with brands, and they want personalized service. I'm going to have to move my little thing. I should move it down there for a second, or over there. That's right. 80% of consumers more likely to make a purchase from a brand that provides personalized experiences. 63% expect personalization just as a standard thing. And this personalization and customization trend has been refined through time. But there are great opportunities now with all kinds of products and services to customize to the nth degree, really. They do it from when we think about inventory for this, I mean, we're talking about managing inventory in the whole process for businesses, but they offer choices in the inventory model. It's not just a question that you can have everything customized to a wide degree of specification. They limit the variety, so you can specify, you know, customization within a range, so as it keeps the cost down, and you still get to the marketplace and are profitable. So there are different ways to make the offer. And I think it's about, when we think about advertising, I think it's important to think about the messages we want to convey to consumers, to think about personalization and customization. So, you know, back office says limit variety, front office says customization, personalization, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then you've got this online video streaming trend. I mean, one of the things that seems to be very important. I mean, I was interested to look back. If you look back at the history of advertising, you see the very first advert that was on TV in the United States. It was Bulliver, I think, Bulliver watches, wasn't it? And I think they just said, you know, it was a 4-minute ad. It was not a 4-minute ad, and a 4-second ad, and it cost $9 to make it. And that was $5 in the studio and $4 for some crummy image that they put up on Bulliver watches. And you can still find that online. I mean, the image is dreadful, but the message was just, you know, America keeps to time, or something like that. And when you think about that image, one image, 4 seconds, message, and how successful that ad was. I mean, it generated a huge amount of business for Bulliver watches. Now, I think we're heading back there in some ways, because advertising became, you know, for video adverts, they became very lengthy, very elaborate affairs, and very costly to produce. And some of there were pieces of art, weren't they? I mean, lots of these adverts are pieces of art and very, you know, very significant, almost like a movie. The movie industry's learned a lot from those adverts. But I think with video streaming and the video trends that we're on now, we're going to shorter adverts. And I think we're going to, people's mind span isn't that long either. I think, you know, if you can get to 10 seconds for an ad, and you can get your message across in 10, and you can punch it out, that's a much better way to go. It's less costly, and it's probably got more impact and more effect. Because if you can do something useful in the 10 seconds, make it very different to the traditional ad, you know, if you could learn from that past and even do an advert with a still for 4 seconds and punch out a message, it might cut through the dross that's out there. In it's not all dross, by the way. I mean, there's some good stuff, but it might cut through and connect with a different sort of audience. And I think, you know, you got to do different things. So advertising is an industry that's always about difference, I think. And I think you've got to think about ways to do that difference. And here, this is just a stat that came up. This is from the Advertising Association and WARC, the World Advertising Research Center. And this was a July report that I came across a week or so back. But you can see some of the boxes I've just pulled out there on the side. Video on demand, digital, online, and cinema, all in growth and been growing continuously. So those are very popular kind of trends at the moment. So what could we learn from that? Well, what it tells me is that video is popular. So building on the video link, one of the things when we think about the news industry and news media, one of the things that's important for print on the page is to have pop-out videos. If you go on to all sorts of things, you go on to Reuters and look at Reuters Press or something, and you look at the online websites, it's always got press articles and press summaries, but it's also got a video that pops up every now and again or pops out. And I think the video on demand in that sense it's slightly different to what we're talking about here, but it's an important message that can come out of it. But when we talk about video on demand, we're thinking about Netflix and all that kind of stuff as well. And we're thinking about all this front of reel and end of reel advertising and mid-reel advertising. But the one thing that strikes me, this is all in that space. The one thing that strikes me is that cinema advertising is making a comeback as well. And I think that's something not to be overlooked. That's an opportunity for some. And then, of course, online keeps growing, doesn't it? It just keeps going up and up. So the spend online, I forget what I saw about online, but I think it's about 74% of advertising is online in terms of spend. It's something like that now. So it just keeps, it seems to never, I'm expecting to wake up one day and see it at 125%. I mean, yeah, it could go that crazy, couldn't it? So what do we take away from those things in terms of our 4 future possibilities? Well, personalization, immersiveness, ethics, and innovation. So I think we're in a world where things are more personalized. We're looking to create immersive experiences for people, and that might be through AI, it might be through VR, virtual reality, it might be through 3D, it might be through this touching, this haptics that I mentioned, it might be those sorts of things. It might be that we want to focus more on the ethics. And if you think about ethics, we've also been pushed into thinking more about ethics because the regulatory frameworks are getting tighter, aren't they, Mark? As you will actually know.
Yeah.
From your experience on the ASA, those regulatory frameworks are getting very, very tight, and pressure is being put on organizations to conform. But we don't want them to conform in that. Well, we do want them to conform in the legal sense, but we also want them to perform in the ethical sense. So I think it's about, doing the right thing before you're pushed to do it. I think that's the way it's going. And I think advertisers that can do that will be the advertisers that will reap rewards in terms of return on investment and profitability. So I think that's an important aspect. And then in innovation, advertising is an industry that is, the cauldron of innovation. If you think about the 3 witches in Macbeth or something like that, and you think about the frogs in the cauldron and so on, and stirring the pot, we're always doing that in advertising, aren't we? We're stirring that pot to make something different in the soup. We're making a better soup for the future, aren't we? So I think it's important that we continue to do that and continue to be innovative and continue to think of different ways we can do things using the technology. And I think experimentation is more part of the game than ever before. I think in the early days of advertising, I think it was pure experimentation. And I think we're returning to this age of experimentation. We've come through the age of, I suppose, disruption, and we're now in an age of experimentation. And we're more likely to experiment, I think, in the modern time, because we see possibilities and we're not afraid to do it because we think that people will be more accepting of experimentation. So I think experimentation is another important way to go. And if you're a small, lean business and you are a disruptor in that marketplace, and you're trying to disrupt the status quo of the industry that you're in, and you've got advertising that's also disruptive and innovative and trying to do something different in that space, then that's a nice match for the brand and the business, as well as the advertising agency involved. So I think it's about doing those kinds of things too. And when it comes down to a couple of the strategies, I've got a wall that says, you know, I don't know whether it's on the slide back here. I think it is somewhere, but it's a wall of possibilities about everything. You know, TV, radio, podcast, streaming, newspapers. It's the whole gambit of what you can actually do. But in the process of the approach that you take, I think one of the things that you can be thinking about quite carefully is this approach of native advertising. And I think in news media, this has worked quite well for a lot of businesses, and it's still working quite well, but it hasn't been exploited to the full in some cases, because I think there's a long way to go with this. With native advertising, you can have an article of interest on the one side about you could have alongside that Save the Planet image that you see in front of you there, you could have an article about the science of the planet, climate change or something like that. Or you could have an article about plastic waste and the problem of plastic waste and waste in the oceans. And then you could have this piece from a community that's kind of, you know, when you think about community approaches in this native advertising space, they could come in with their messages and it could sit quite nicely alongside the science. And that way you've also got, I've got some concerns down there: trust, transparency, ethics, and legal compliance. Obviously, you've got to tell people this is an advert, so you've got to comply with the legal situation, and there's an ethical need to do so. But it does create a transparent message in that sense once you've done the ethics and the legal compliance. And the thing about press and press pages, newspapers, if you like, with native advertising, is the fact that you've got trust. And that's a big plus, because that's what social media doesn't have. All the surveys and all the stuff that I've been reading recently says, you know, people don't trust things like YouTube. They don't trust all the stuff they see on social media. They don't trust the messages that are popping out from some of those organizations. But newspapers already have that. Lots of newspapers already possess trust. And particularly in some age groups, if you look at, say, the older age groups, I would say over 50, they trust newspapers a lot more than they trust social media. If you look at youngsters, they're probably getting educated on YouTube from when they're about 10 or 11. So there's different media for different groups of people, I think. And again, you've got social media. I'm not going to say too much because we've talked a bit about it, but trust, transparency, ethics, and legal compliance are the issues. Now, another important aspect of modern advertising is, and perhaps a less costly way, and I come back to the small and medium-sized businesses again here. I'm not expecting them to use the celebrity influencer in the sense of getting David Beckham or Ronaldo or Look, I've gone to football already. I've jumped back already into football. But, we're not talking about getting those sorts of people along, but we are talking about the influencer who has a community already built and tying in our interest with an influencer that works in the space that we're interested in getting into to target. And that could be quite a low cost way to get involved in being effective with your advertising. And so I don't think enough is made of looking for influencers who are parts of communities. They might be people, for example, on LinkedIn who are influencers who have, a good following. When I say a good following, perhaps they've got a few thousand people that follow them. And that might be enough for what we want to get to in that particular space. So it's again about knowing who you want to target and what your audience is and the message you want to get across. So that's another thought, and that's something perhaps for the smaller and medium-sized businesses to be thinking about, where it might not cost as much as for the large business who wants to get the influencer who is the star act. Where's the future of advertising? It's in technology, I think, but it's also not to overlook the art. I think there's a science in the metrics and understanding the analytics, but I think there is also a part of this industry that will always be art. And I think that's important to recognize. And I think there are places for, we create in the 37.1 billion that's generated in advertising in the UK, we create opportunities for diverse and inclusive communities, if you like, of people coming in to do things. We've got musicians, we've got people in fashion, we've got artists, we generate a lot of employment for those sorts of people, and we generate a lot of employment for all the techie people that actually work in the industry too, working on the stacks on the ad tech and stuff, and in programmatic work. So and for photographers and so on. So there are lots and lots of people involved in that content production side of the business. Now, the question is, will artificial intelligence destroy some of that? And that's a big question that lots of people are saying. When I talk to people now, they're saying, well, will AI be writing the ads? Will AI be producing the images? Will AI take over the studio? Well, to some extent, I think it's a tool, and we have to know how to use the tool. At the moment, we're experimenting, and we're trying to do all kinds of things with AI. And you'll know, Mark, from using perhaps ChatGPT and so on. Yeah. We've all had a look, and we've had a go, and we use it to do different things. But I mean, there's an awful lot of repetition in the stuff it throws up in terms of text, if you put text in. And there's an awful lot of what I would call formulaic approaches to what they actually do, which may work in some instances, and it might save time, but it will never replace the human thought process, which isn't always rational or objective. It might be emotional, an emotional connection. And will AI have the emotional connection in that sense? It will learn, and it will learn from humans, but I'm not sure that it's going to take over the world like some people fear in that sense. It's designed to do lots of things, but not necessarily to replace. I can see, textile, the Luddites all over again in this process of AI and the fear of job losses. And certainly it will replace some jobs, but those jobs will change. They'll change to something else, and perhaps release resources and creative talent to do other things. And so I'm not that threatened by AI as perhaps some people, I think.
Well, that's it from Tony Hines for this week in part 1 of his presentation on the future of advertising. So I hope you found that useful. I hope you found today's show useful. And we'll be back The next part of the show will be released in exactly 1 week's time, and we look forward to seeing you then. Thank you for joining us, and bye for now.